What news stories mattered most this week in the world of media and advertising? I'm Jack Benjamin, reporter for the senior reporter for the Media Leader.
Oh,
crap!
Senior reporter. What happened, Jack?
Swore. I got promoted.
Well done,
to senior reporter. Yeah. Hey,
well
thanks.
Done.
Thanks for helping make that a thing. No, I need to update the script.
I'm Omar Oakes, editor-in-chief for the time being, by the way, of the Media Leader. And yeah, well done, Jack. You've been here for over 2 years, and you've done a great job covering, in particular, news platforms, social media platforms, gaming increasingly, and really getting to grips with what's going on in media and advertising. So well done, you. Keep up the good work.
Hey, thanks so much. On the podcast this week, we'll be discussing MediaSense's latest acquisition, Spotify's latest earnings, a new study on youth news consumption habits, and more. But first, there has been quite a lot of news this week regarding streaming service ad tiers and how they're performing in the UK and abroad. We're recording this episode on Wednesday, and this morning we received the latest update from Barb's establishment survey, which measures household use of streaming services. The top line is that total households with an SVOD subscription are practically flat from last quarter. There's 20.1 million households in the UK with that. But ad tiers of Netflix and Disney Plus are picking up users. Omar, I'm curious, are there any details from the report that sort of stood out? We have seems like a plateauing total number of households that are willing to have a subscription service that they subscribe to. But there are these ad tiers that are picking up subscribers. So it's not exactly churn, but it's people maybe moving from a full premium subscription to a cheaper with ads subscription. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't think the movement has been massive. I think if you're Netflix in particular, you've got such a huge... You remember that Netflix has been around for a long time, and for a long time in the UK anyway, was the only streaming service that people had. So there's a big library, there's a big legacy advantage they have. So it doesn't surprise me that the numbers aren't moving that much. I think what's happening because of continued pressure on wages in the UK, as with other Western European markets, you're seeing the air slowly seeping out of the balloon in terms of people migrating from paid for subscription to ad free. Remember that this whole strategy about pursuing a cheaper ad funded tier was essentially to grab all those students who were, they were all sharing each other's passwords from their dorm rooms, to kind of get those people to be, fully paid up users, albeit cheaper with ads. So they did that. They cracked down on password sharing. So now what we're seeing is kind of that longer term realignment, if you like, to where media has always been, which is, a mixture between subscription, people who are prepared to pay for a premium service, and people who aren't. And that's the way that media should be, to make it maximally accessible to all.
There are now 3.8 million households on Netflix's ad tier. Of a total number of households on Netflix are 17.3 million. Meanwhile, Disney has 1.2 million households on Disney Plus's ad tier, while Disney Plus has 7.5 million total subscribers or household subscriptions, according to Barb's latest figures. That amounts to a 36.7% quarter-on-quarter increase for Netflix and 46% quarter-on-quarter increase for Disney Plus in terms of their ad tiers. And meanwhile, Prime Video's ad tier currently reaches the most UK households at 11.5 million. That's significantly higher, but also the sort of strategy for Amazon Prime Video was, we're just going to default everyone into the ad tier, and if people want to pay more, they can pay more for ad-free option. And it seems like, it depends on what you want to do, I guess. But if you want to funnel a lot of revenue toward advertising as opposed to subscription, that seems like the model has worked for Amazon, maybe more so in terms of just picking up pure ad tier subscribers.
As they did several years ago on Amazon homepage, on the .com homepage, when you suddenly saw a huge spike in the number of affiliate ads that was all over the user journey when you were doing search, when you were checking out. So the key thing for Amazon has always been to sell more dishwasher tablets. So if you can help people along the user journey and make some money along the way, you have to remember that they're playing a slightly different game when it comes to SVOD.
There was one other interesting detail. Barb's head of insight, Doug Welpdale, He said, quote, "The overall number of homes accessing at least one SVOD service remained above 20 million, but the number with more than two services dipped below 14 million homes, suggesting viewers continue to be remaining wary of economic turbulence." I mean, anecdotally, how many subscription services do you actually subscribe to? And is it more than one?
Oh, yeah, it's currently, because we come on and off Netflix, because there ain't no loyalty bonus. There's no annual discount like Disney does. So yeah, we got Netflix at the moment. We've got Disney. They do an annual bonus and, do it for the kids. We currently have a month of Prime, but we don't usually get Prime. Apple, because they do it with the Apple bundle with, your data and your Apple Music. Bundles are a huge story in this. We don't see it too much in the UK, but if you look at what's going on in other European markets, there's a lot more bundling of these different streaming services, in particular Netflix and Spotify, where they might get bundled into a cable pay TV package, and that happens less in the US. I don't know if it's a natural in ABC One households, if there's a natural limit of most households within that doing two streaming services. I'm not sure if it's the cost as much as it's just the time. Like, who has the time to watch all this content? I'd like to see a proper report on that, kind of when you kind of have those different variables and what the formula spits out as being, the ideal.
It's funny you say that. There's a Nielsen Grace Note study that of streaming services and the content they have on. We were talking about this earlier, and there's over 550,000 individual episodes of TV shows across all streaming services, right? There is too much content that for people to get through. And so I'm sympathetic to the idea that actually people only really need one service maybe, and then maybe some bonuses if they want to watch individual programs, and maybe they can take advantage of bundles in order to do that, and they might churn through those services. So it doesn't surprise me that there's not that many households that really feel like they need more than one subscription service. But I'm also not perhaps the biggest TV watcher. There are other members of the broader staff at AdWanted UK that watch TV all the time, and I'm not necessarily one of those people. But
yeah, didn't that? Well, firstly, I'm keen to know how many streaming services you have as a lighter TV viewer. But also, didn't that Grace Note report study say something like 500,000 shows have been created since 2010? I can't remember the exact stat, but the content boom has really come on. People forget in the last 15 years since Netflix pivoted from DVD to streaming. And I do wonder if you do a retrospective analysis of what Netflix has done in the last 10 years since, I guess, House of Cards, Orange is the New Black, these big kind of like binging series that people got hooked on and really kind of attracted them to the Netflix brand. I wonder whether, is it better to have that big content library in terms of retaining users, or is it actually to do more around your big properties like a Disney would do with, Star Wars? They're rebooting Star Wars again, right? Whether you kind of, you lean more into a Stranger Things, which is your hugely successful franchise, and you do more spin-offs around that, more activity, or whether it looks like what they have been doing is to lean more into an international strategy where you have like a Squid Game from Korea, Money Heist from Spain, and you kind of internationalize those things, which gives you a big strategic advantage, but doesn't necessarily retain user loyalty. It's two different things that they have to contend with.
It's interesting. So in the Nielsen Grace Notes data, Netflix does have 68% of its offerings were produced outside the US, and that's the most among any streaming service. And to the point that you were saying earlier, more than 70% of the content available on these different streaming platforms has been released since 2010. So the vast majority of content is newly created that might not have necessarily been created by the services themselves. It could have also been created by broadcasters or other production companies, etc.
Yeah, but Jack, don't dodge the question. How many streaming services do you have?
At the moment, we have access to just Netflix, I think. Prime Video is one of those things where if there's a movie we want to watch, then maybe we'll actually click the £3 whatever rent button to watch it if that's the only place we can watch it. Sometimes come on and off, something like Now, if there's a very specific, usually HBO show that I want to watch. And Disney Plus, we had been on because it was bundled for a little bit, and then that bundle went away, and we were really just using it to watch Modern Family. And like, it's like, I love Modern Family, but I don't need to subscribe to Disney Plus just to watch certain shows. There's most of the new Star Wars or Marvel shows. I'm not a personal fan, so
did you see that episode of Modern Family where somebody was embarrassed about something, so instead of just being honest about it, they started lying about it, and it became this massive lie that ended up with ridiculous consequences. I'll tell you which episode it was. Every single episode of Modern Family is exactly the same, and I enjoyed it once, but by the 100th time I started to get bored of it.
It's the same with any sitcom. I mean, the formula is the formula, and it works for a reason.
That more than most.
We talked a little bit about Netflix already. Netflix announced its global ad tier subscribers have hit 70 million. So that's not just the UK. That's all total around the world ad tier subscribers. More than half of new subscribers in markets where the ad tier is available are choosing the ad tier. And they've also launched its in-house ad tech in Canada. Rolling that out in 2025. So that's a big deal actually for them and for advertisers.
Yeah.
And notably, Netflix announced that it's sold out all its ad inventory for NFL Christmas Day games already. That's going to obviously be occurring on Christmas Day. So that's quite ahead of schedule, I suppose, in terms of making sure all the ad slots are booked. But they're really pushing in comms this sort of partnership idea. And they talked about it at their upfronts as well, that you reported on. Remember, Emily in Paris had like loads of different sponsors specifically, and Squid Game, I think, has Kia as its specific sponsor, and the NFL games have their own sponsors. It's not just that they're filling ad slots. They really want to talk more about these partner relationships. And I'm curious why you think that might be.
Yeah, we mentioned it on a previous episode, and I come back to Stranger Things, which when that show first kind of became a big hit for Netflix, there was just all these branded partnership things that were going on. I'm going to get the brand names wrong, but I'm pretty sure Burger King was one. There was a lot of, 80s revivalist stuff. Remember those brands from the 80s? Well, they still exist. Right. And remember when, it looked like that and the logo was slightly different. So that's what Netflix has really been good at leveraging branded content, product placement into its bigger shows. As well, that's why I come back to whether actually commercially, whether it's the big advantage them to lean in more commercially to its more successful shows, as opposed to doing what a traditional publisher might do with, a big global audience and, budget where you just kind of commission loads of stuff and let the audience take care of things. We've documented, the issues that it's had with building out an ad proposition, not least the technical side of it. Xandr, Microsoft was the original partner, and that deal fell apart for reasons which have never been fully explained, but you can probably guess. And now, they've been on this journey, as you mentioned, where they've been building their own tech stack internally. They're going to launch that Canada first, but it will quickly be soon coming to the UK and the US.
I feel like to your point about whether you need to go after broad audience with a huge catalog or really go after advertisers who want to be on a big show and getting consumers that want to be on these big shows. I think you need to do both. Really.
Well, they'll say, why not do both? Yeah.
Well, no, it's obviously not. Obviously, all these companies have not been able to do both, but Netflix is the one that does have the largest catalog, and a lot of that is because of all these internationally produced shows and movies. And you never know when one becomes a big hit, like Squid Game, and then they also have these big flagship titles that everyone's really excited for, like Wednesday or Stranger Things.
Look, the obvious answer to why not do both is YouTube, where they try and have it both ways. So if you're Mr. Beast, for example, Mr. Beast has got such a huge audience that he's like, I'm just going to make my own chocolate brand. And every episode, I'm just going to promote the hell out of this chocolate brand to the point where it gets really irritating. But you know what? It's fine because I've still got such a large audience. People are still going to watch it. Imagine if you're placing an ad on a video where somebody's already doing an ad. And it happens all the time on YouTube, and it's really irritating. And that doesn't happen on broadcast TV. The rules prevent you from doing it. And do you know why? Because advertisers wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want to advertise on something which is already promoting something else. It's a bad user experience. So there is a question about how Netflix will have to decide between those two strategies.
In terms of having so much product placement or partnerships with some of their flagship titles, and also then ads showing up.
Yeah. It comes down to content decisions as well. So people in the industry that I've talked to are getting very excited about this Netflix documentary that's coming out. I think it's next week. It's called The Shopping Conspiracy, where it goes really deep into how marketers play dirty tricks in order to buy us to consume more and more. Consumers have no idea about the true environmental impact of the shopping decisions. Now, imagine watching that, and then suddenly ads pop up because you're on the Netflix cheaper with ads tier, right? So these content decisions, as broadcasters have been grappling them for years, and Netflix, if it's serious about developing a high quality ad product, these are the things it has to consider too.
It's a really great point. There is another streaming service that we haven't talked about yet, but that just launched a cheaper with ads tier in the UK, and that's Paramount Plus. What's going on with that? What's the strategy for Paramount Plus? I mean, it's obviously a bit smaller than some of the other sort of streaming giants that we've been talking about, just in terms of overall households that have subscribed to their premium version, but now they have an ads tier. So do you think more people are going to be attracted to Paramount Plus?
Well, I mean, it's dependent on the content, because we talked before about what's the natural limit in terms of how much time and disposable income households will have to spend on watching TV all day. It comes down to the success of Yellowstone and Frasier, and are they going to one day do a Mission Impossible TV franchise because Tom Cruise is 80, 90 years old, and he's still jumping out of planes. And
he's in his 60s, right?
Well, whatever age he is, he looks incredible still. And they're about to bring out the last ever episode in that movie franchise. So what are they going to do with that? It does in the long term, it does come down to content. Audiences will follow content.
Currently, Paramount Plus has 2.8 million UK households with access to it. So I think the question for Paramount Plus will be, can they grow that pie, or is that 2.8 million going to become just tiered between some people that already subscribe to Paramount Plus will choose the ad tier, and some people that are already subscribed will remain in the ad-free version and pay a little bit more for that. And so the question is whether or not they can get new subs. And to your point, I think content is a big deal. So what's the big show on Paramount Plus? Must be Yellowstone, probably is one of the biggest shows. That's definitely more of an American show. I don't know if it's popular here, but
I think it is quite popular. But again, it will come down to bundling as well. Remember that Paramount Plus launched in the UK. I think if you're a Sky customer, you get it for 3 months, 6 months, something like that. Try before you buy. And bundling in the long term is going to be a big thing, particularly around pay TV operators all over Europe are concerned about churn, and being able to offer an attractive suite of content is going to be part of the mix too.
Apart from all the streaming TV news, there were a number of additional stories that we wanted to cover today. We'll tick them off one by one. First, MediaSense has acquired R3, which is a creative and media advisory. The UK-based media consultancy is expanding its remit and footprint to North America and Asia, coming just a few months after MediaSense bought PwC's marketing and media owner advisory team. Omar, is this a new era of consolidation for media consultancies that we've entered into?
Not a new era, but it's definitely an era which is continuing, and it follows other areas in consolidation we've seen all over the industry. Agencies being merged, media owner mergers we've talked about in previous episodes of the podcast, and media becoming audiences fragmenting, but at the same time the internet creating a media environment where kind of everything's kind of going into one big blob. So the consolidation piece, particularly for MediaSense, is interesting. So up until this announcement yesterday, at the time of recording, they were this UK-based media consultancy that had been bought by private equity, majority owned 3 years ago. They bought PwC earlier this year, but was still kind of a UK operation. Now with R3, they can legitimately say that, hey, we're active in North America, we're active in Asia. And by the way, we're not just doing media consultancy, pitch management anymore on the media side. We're now doing creative and other areas. Interestingly, you see this year, we've had, I think 6, 7, possibly 8 integrated pitches, global integrated pitches by major brands. Normally you might only have 2 or 3. So this is definitely something we're seeing more of in terms of big brands getting internally their house in order since the pandemic, saying, hey, we need to be able to have we can't just think about TV advertising, for example. We have to think about how brands, how we interact with customers as a brand across numerous touch points. And we just need good people to help us do that, whether it's creating TV ads or helps with your Amazon, Google shopping journey. And that's where they need real help. So these intermediaries, I think, will see a lot more consolidation, a lot more mergers as they they beef up to do that on a global scale. Jack, one for you. A new study from Newsworks has found young people consume news at a much higher rate than widely thought. Jack, what did Newsworks find and why should it matter for advertisers, who I thought, by the way, didn't want to invest in news because it's so unsafe?
Well, I would point to any advertisers that are saying news is unsafe to recent studies from Stagwell, Teeds, Lumen, saying that actually advertise whether or not it's hard news or soft news, it should be just equally brand safe and effective to
What's
advertising.
soft news? That sounds crap.
It's like maybe
here's some soft news.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we're journalists, but
Oh god, is what we do soft news?
No, we do business news. Hard news to me is sort of politics, economy, business, war, things that are, I would argue, important to people's lives that they should really know about. And soft news, equally important, but in a different way, is more about entertainment, culture, whatever the latest celebrities are doing, things that sort of a lot of people are interested in, but probably brands would see them as maybe more brand safe because they're less inoffensive or controversial, like politics might be. Now, that's not my view, but we're journalists, so we obviously have some bias in this conversation. But that's a separate conversation. The Newsworks study essentially found that youth engagement with news brands is likely being underreported. So the study looked at online behaviors of people aged 15 to 29, and they also surveyed the same cohort. So it found that 72% of that cohort actually read news brands online, even though only 16% claimed to read news brands when surveyed. In fact, the average 15 to 29-year-old reads about 6 news articles per day. That includes both this sort of quote-unquote hard and soft news. Although it's worth noting, of course, that the older you get within that cohort, when you get to like 25 to 29, people are a little bit more interested in news than when they're 15 to 19, let's say. And that's pretty normal and not surprising to anyone. So it's quite interesting for advertisers. The idea that young people can't necessarily be reached through news brands, I think, is fairly common. People feel like that's a really tough demographic to reach, and maybe they're chasing them on social media. And to be fair, news brands themselves are chasing that audience on social media too, and they're interacting with them there. But there's clearly some interaction happening between young people and being interested in news. In other news, Spotify reported its third quarter earnings on Tuesday. What should people know about the health of its business, especially its ads business?
Yes, I'll come on to ads, but the top line, there were lots for them to crow about, and the shares went up by about 8% following the release. So they've hit a landmark, actually. They've passed 2.25 billion premium subscribers, 252 premium subscribers. Healthy profit margin despite a slowdown in the ad-supported business. So, it's crazy, actually. Like, this is a Swedish company which is now valued higher than Volvo, H&M, Ericsson. It's a huge company, Spotify, and audio streaming. It's worth taking note of that. But yeah, 12% increase in premium paid subscribers, similar increase for the ad-supported freebie users. Ad revenue growth slowed to 6% to just under €500 million. And meanwhile, the premium revenues grew by 21%. To €3.5 billion. So even though the premium business where people pay for it ad-free is so much bigger, so much more established, that is still growing more than the cheaper ad tier. And remember when for years now, Spotify have been talking about ambitions to have ad revenue as 20% as part of its overall total revenue, and it's just it's going backwards in that journey. So that's really interesting. Interesting also, the company highlighted in the earnings release yesterday that Spotify is well positioned to sustainably grow towards long-term goals outlined in our 2022 Investor Day. Long-term goals essentially were trying to make more from advertising,
right,
as well as trying to make more from podcasts. Fast forward to the end of last year, and Daniel Ek came out and announced a lot of redundancies, 1,500 redundancies, global headcount of 9,000. It's quite a big proportion. So that might give you a clue into why Spotify is suddenly so much more profitable a year later.
Sure, cost cutting.
And also, podcasts, there's still, audience measurement, as we often talk about in the Media Leader. When it comes down to podcasts, audience measurement is still too opaque. Advertisers say it, agencies say it, everyone knows it. Everyone, we have a podcast ourselves, and we don't get the data on audience listenership as much as we'd like. Podcasting it's always going to be underserved by the advertising community unless it sorts out audience measurement.
And that should include attention, I imagine. I mean, I feel like something that doesn't get said when talking about podcast advertising, especially the sort of host ad read advertising that a lot of production companies will chase individually, separate from Spotify, is that people just skip those ads, or they're not paying attention. They'll tune out, they'll mute it when an ad comes on. I mean, it's the same with TV to a certain degree, but at least you have a visual stimulus that might catch your attention if you mute something. Not the case with podcasts. I don't know if that necessarily undermines conversations that are happening, but there's lots to sort of sort out in terms of podcast measurement and audio measurement more generally. Really interesting that ad revenue was only 6% year on year in Q3. It was 13% in Q2. So really seeing a slowdown this year. And I think your point is well taken that Spotify had wanted to really drive that and hasn't, but the rest of the business does seem to be healthy, and maybe part of that is because of cost-cutting measures.
Yeah, and they did mention a challenging brand environment, but it was also a challenging brand environment last year. And the thing about online advertising, Spotify being completely online, is that it's easier to turn off your digital advertising than it is with long-term offline, out-of-home TV, radio activity. So you would have thought that they would have felt it last year as much as this year. Please write me a letter, Spotify, if you can point out why that's not the case. But it seems to be a lot to do with their business as well.
It's a similar thing with someone like Snapchat. Snap has also talked about brand advertising was weaker this year, and they're wanting to move into the sort of long tail so that they can offset the volatility in the brand advertising market. And I'd be curious to see if Spotify at some point really wants to start chasing long tail advertisers a bit more and what that would do.
Now, Jack, ITV posted its own third quarter results last week and warned it expects total ad revenue to decline in the fourth quarter, the big quarter with all the Christmas ads and, joy to the world. It expects ad revenue to decline by up to 7% year on year. ITV Studios revenue has also fallen, and ITV has announced more cost-cutting measures. Jack, what explains this weak forecast?
Well, ITV attributed the weak forecast to a mix of a tough comparable from last year. There's Rugby World Cup last year. I suppose fair enough. But there's also frozen marketing budgets that were caused from the lack of clarity around the budget that released on Halloween this year. And the question, I think, will be whether or not the release of that budget will sort of unleash marketing budgets, and we'll get an idea of that later in the quarter when the next probably IPA Bellwether report comes out, because this is something that a number of UK specific companies probably were dealing with as well. That's what they've attributed to. It could be other things. Studio revenue, as you mentioned, has fallen. That's another concern. That was something that ITV was definitely looking to boost. Across the whole business, revenue dropped 8% year on year in the first 9 months of 2024. However, revenue at ITV Studios specifically fell 20% to $1.2 billion. That's something that the broadcaster attributed to expected phasing of production deliveries, which are heavily weighted to Q4. So there are more studio productions that are going to be going out in Q4. So maybe you see that number start to recover a little bit. And yeah, they announced more cost savings worth $20 million in 2024. Some of that is being brought forward from cost savings that were planned for 2025. And there's also a $10 million reduction in content costs that's happening. I don't know how concerning you think that is for ITV. Obviously, the TV ad market is something that's been really unsettled, to put it lightly, over the past year now. And it doesn't seem like it's necessarily picked up.
Linear audiences continue to fall. Video on demand audiences continue to rise. So part of this is a recalibration, and there's going to be, with any major change, long-term change, there will be some pain in the short term. It remains to be seen whether the revenue that a broadcaster will get from online video on demand will make up for the loss in linear. That's a whole different podcast. But what was interesting was, I can't remember the exact date, but it may have been 18 months ago, when ITV Studios actually became bigger than ITV, the ad selling business. And that was on the eve of the US writers' strike. And a lot of the demand for ITV shows, content which is sold to overseas territory, a lot of that demand comes from the US. So we're still seeing a lot of the ripple effects from the impact that Netflix has had on completely changing the dynamic in terms of how the US writers, how royalties are paid, how commissions are made off the basis of that. That whole market is in a massive state of flux. So it is part of a story of the ad market, at least temporarily, being weak in the UK, the longer term trend towards linear to streaming, but also come back to the way that content is commissioned for TV. We've not even talked about YouTube as well, but YouTube plays a part in this as well, as people consume more user-generated content and broadcasters adapt for that environment as well. So it's gonna take a lot of light feet, I think, for someone like Carolyn McCall or anyone who's running a major broadcaster right now.
Well, we will certainly hold their feet to the fire when we have the next chance to give them an interview. You've interviewed Carolyn McCall previously. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you out there next week.
Bye-bye.